Got it.
Well, good morning, everybody. Saturday, June 10th, Coffee and Conversation, SD52. And I think also maybe Moms Demand Action has promoted our conversation this morning. I am thrilled to have John Barden from the South Metro Moms Demand Action Group, along with State Senator Jim Carlson and State Rep Liz Ryer. Liz's time with us is a little bit limited, so after a brief introduction, I've got a couple of questions that maybe Liz can address. And then Jim and John, you can pick up on them as well. I'm delighted to have this gathering together. I'm sad that the level of gun violence makes such a conversation necessary. And I note, as I was mentioning to John before we started, that there are several other political topics that are grabbing headlines at the moment. One of which, of course, is the former presidential indictment. It's kind of sucking up all the oxygen. And if it's not that subject, it's Pride Month, which is a wonderful celebration, of course, but highlights some of the hate groups that we see going on in the country. And then, of course, there is the omnipresent gun violence phenomenon. In just a couple of short sentences, John, if you wouldn't mind telling us about you and moms in Minnesota, and then I want to ask Liz a couple of questions before we lose her.
Sure. Unfortunately, my introduction to this field was garnered by the fact that my cousin lost his son at the Sandy Hook shooting. So that's how I got involved. In describing this group, the first thing that I always say is, I am so impressed by the dedication and intelligence and creativity of these women that when I meet new people coming on, I just stress the fact that your time with this group will never be wasted. They are amazing. If I had to sum up in 3 words what their approach is, I'd say education, advocacy, and electioneering. And I'll expand on that later, but they're just terrific. I have one little anecdote that also might illustrate this. I was at a fundraiser a couple of years ago, and I happened to run into Melissa Hortman, the Speaker of the House. And I said, I work with these people, and at the time, it had been a very tough slog to get any of this done. And I said, I'm always trying to think of, what we might be able to do. And she kind of cut me off and said, are you kidding? She goes, you guys have changed the entire complexion of the legislature in this state. Just keep doing what you're doing. And as I say, that revolves around educating people around this issue, advocating with the legislature, and working very hard to elect gun sense candidates. That's kind of our approach.
Cool. And I do want to acknowledge T McClenty's note in the chat. Good morning, T. You're right. Juneteenth is a big deal this month. I didn't want to minimize that recognition. It certainly had occurred to me as I was thinking about the list of things that are going on in June, and that's a very important one as well. Liz, while we have you, I'd love to get your thoughts on a couple of things. One is what you see as the effectiveness of the Everytown and Moms Demand Action group in the legislature. What you think about the legislation that was passed this year, and where you think we can go going on into future sessions with the legislature. So why don't you give us your thoughts, and if there's something else I've missed that you want to mention, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for holding this session on gun violence and gun violence prevention. It's huge. And is my audio okay? Just checking because I'm in the car.
Yes. Yeah, we're
okay,
good.
Okay. John, I have to start by saying how sorry I am for your family's loss.
Thank you.
I'm heartsick for you, and I'm sure that loss never fades. And it's the kind of thing that we shouldn't, people like me, people whose families haven't been directly affected, shouldn't need that to be mobilized. And often, though, hearing those personal stories of loss is the thing that connects people with issues. And so it's an incredible act of generosity of families who have been devastated to build on their experience to help save others. I can't say enough about the advocacy of the gun sense groups, Moms Demand Action, of course, among them, from a perspective of giving a platform. But one of the things I've really appreciated as a legislator is that you help me be more effective, because you've done such a great job of raising the issue and equipping us with information to be knowledgeable in talking to voters and constituents and other Minnesotans about the issue and why it matters and why we're not trying to destroy the Second Amendment, all the things that people say. We couldn't be as effective without the work you're doing, because you're educating us as well as educating others. As far as the legislation we passed, I'm very grateful that we passed legislation. I'm greedy. And so to me, it's like, that's all we need more. But I'm sure that I'm not the only person in this room who is feeling that way. And I'm so appreciative that we were able to stay united as a caucus. I really was a little worried. I was a little afraid that would be a place where the unity might not be strong enough. And, you just don't know until you get there. So I appreciate the Senate. I appreciate the House, the people who represent areas where they had to take hard votes to be able to vote for this. And they did it. And, I didn't feel like I had that situation myself. I have a strong community that told me at the doors that this was important, but I know not everyone has that. Happy to take questions from you, Ron, or for anyone else. And when I'm almost to my destination, I'll pop in my earbuds then so I can just squeak out as many minutes as I can.
Okay, Liz, what more can advocacy groups like Moms do to help the legislature going forward?
I don't think I could say it any better than the speaker has said. Keep doing what you're doing. I think that's really true. To me, the key is, what are legislators doing and what are advocacy groups doing this summer and this fall during the interim? We're not in an election season. We're just working. And so I think that, using that time creatively. The other thing I'd say is, don't let us legislators off the hook. I'm proud that I was recognized by Moms and by, I'm just like drawing a blank, by other advocacy groups. And so you gave me that recognition with the expectation that I would be doing the work to also push for this, educate, advance the issues, hold me accountable, hold us all accountable to be doing the work that we promised when you gave us your support. And, I hear from way too many constituents or groups, and it's like, oh yeah, I hear from you. Yeah, I hear from politicians every 2 years in the House. Don't be someone who only shows up then and then doesn't come around for another 2 years. Hold us accountable.
Well, that's a great segue back to John. So John, a couple of things. First off, what's your role specifically in Moms? And then pick up on the thread that Liz extended to you. You've described Moms as having three functions: education, advocacy, and electioneering. Describe them, and what are you doing going forward in this off year to continue to hold legislators accountable?
Sure. Um, well, as part of those roles, the first one I mentioned was education, and that is to get our issue in front of the public and make people understand the nature of the problem, the severity of the problem, and the potency of some of the solutions. So we do that by information that we impart at our rallies, that we impart at our meetings. And then this bears on my role. We write extensively to the metropolitan and the greater Minnesota newspapers. We write letters to the editor explaining our position, explaining the nature of the problem. My role had been, it was called the communications co-lead, and I would write many letters and also help other people edit their letters and get them printed. I stepped down from that a little while ago, but I'm still involved in that.
Yeah.
But just to
I know that role. I do it for our Senate district, or at least I did, and I have just been in the process of turning that role over myself.
Well, it works. God knows the other side is getting their message out. And I live as a little blue dot in a Red Sea out here where I am, and I have neighbors come up to me all the time that have read my letters and said, I agree with the position that you're taking on this issue. So they work. But anyway, the first one, as I say, there through our rallies, through our meetings, through our letters, we get our message out. And the advocacy portion of the effort is that we are in contact with our legislators all the time. We have a day we call Advocacy Day, where we take members from each district and meet with our representatives and senators to discuss the issue. We're in contact with them throughout the year. We attend hearings in committees. And then the electioneering part is, if I had a nickel for every door that we have knocked on, or phone call that we've made, or text that we sent during election season, it would amount to a lot of money. We're very, very active during election season, supporting our candidates.
So what's the best way for people in a political unit like Senate District 52 to find the advertising, the promotion of your rallies and your advocacy days and things like that, so that maybe we can join forces with you?
Yeah. Well, the best way is to join one of the local groups. Down here, it's the South Metro chapter. And the best way to get started is to text the word READY, READY, to 644.33. And that'll get you started.
I've never seen a dot in a
dash, excuse me. Good point. Dash 644-33. And that's what you started.
I've never seen a dash in a text phone number either. Is that really is? I mean, 644.
I believe so.
Type the dash.
I think so. Otherwise, just put 64433. But that's the way it's written. Yeah.
Okay. Or can we get directly in touch, perhaps, with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Would you like my cell number for texting, or?
Well, I certainly have your email address, but if you are willing to give us your cell number, that'd be great. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can publicize my address. My cell number is 952-221-8703. You can call or text that number.
Fabulous. Well, maybe we will have more of our folks connect up with you, because after all, I think we share the same goals and the same advocacy and the same electioneering. So to the extent that our structure and your structure can dovetail, obviously, from my point of view, it'll be up to our officers and our group, but how intertwined we'd like to make that. But from my own personal point of view, I would love to do that.
Yeah.
You mentioned some education things. I remember actually some years ago, back when Moms was getting started, you did a lot of house parties Are you still doing those?
There are occasionally. We have several very prominent members, one of whom is a lady named Megan Wald. She's a law professor at the University of Minnesota. And she has a program whereby students are gaining experience in bringing actually suits against gun manufacturers to be responsible for their products. And she has had one or two. It's not something that we do regularly, but we have had them, yes.
Okay. I remember early on Shannon Watts came to town, and I had the privilege of meeting her before things were really getting off the ground. And so that was a whole lot of fun. And just as a matter of procedure, if you have a question that you'd like to bring to the group, please raise your electronic hand. And I see Jeff Sparks has done so. So Jeff, what's your question? You're muted, Jeff. There you go.
Hi, I actually have two questions. One, since gun manufacturers have been exempted from liability by the federales, has anyone investigated the possibility of requiring gun owners to insure certain classes of weapons? For example, assault rifles, could you tell a gun owner you need to carry a $10 million liability policy on that weapon? Has anyone investigated that? Then number two, has anyone investigated the possibility that, well, you can own an assault rifle, you're required to keep it at a state registered gun range and only use it there?
I haven't heard about the latter. I've certainly heard about the former. As you might know, Jeff, the Sandy Hook parents were successful in suing Remington, a very huge settlement in Connecticut. So
yeah, what was the theory behind that? Do you know, John? How did they get around the federal exemption?
I believe it's centered around advertising to minors and the way they advertise their weapon. Yeah, I don't understand all the legal issues behind it, but they won a very big settlement.
Right, I do recall that. I wonder if that's going to blow a hole in the liability exemption. So I gather the university law school professor is trying to bring claims of that kind, and to see how far it can go.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, which ones they've instituted, but that's the idea, is that these students coming out of this law school will have experience in actually doing this. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Very interesting approach.
I have heard that some discussion on the subject of insurance requirements. Do you know anything about that one?
No, as I say, I know it's come up in all kinds of venues, but I don't know anything about the progress of it. No.
Okay, Jim Carlson, I wonder if you have seen that issue pop up in the state Senate, and if so, where it's gone and whether it can go anywhere.
Well, thank you, Ron. There has been some talk about it, but just what kind of protections for what kind of actions is usually the issue where, first of all, a lot of gun violence is by people who you do not expect to do gun violence, and just mandating insurance is something that's that would be very complicated. We've talked about it a bit, and actually the most frequent discussion of it is forcing law enforcement individuals to have insurance policies. But the problem there, and I think you probably know that as a lawyer, that really law enforcement actions are insured by their employers, by municipalities. Right. So really, there's very little that can be done there. And also, in my view of these things, is that the action precedes any kind of law or of lawsuit for loss and for damages and for anything that would be a civil suit. So it's one of those things where I tend to feel that we should be trying to limit the possession of firearms from people who are dangerous. And that is something that, and if you look at the bill that was passed this year for what's called public safety, and it's 2909. And I think that was a Senate file. And that's one thing that when we talk about what we can do, just looking at some of the things that have been done, and believe me, there were a lot of things that were in the Senate public safety bill this year, public safety omnibus. And, even though people hate omnibus bills, we also love them because we can get things in there that otherwise wouldn't get passed if they were individually brought up for a vote. So if you look at 2909, there were two bills that, I hate to go on and on here, but there were two bills that describe all of the things that are in that omnibus bill. And this is something that is important for us to look at if we really want to get detailed information. And that's Senate File 117 and Senate File 116. And if you look at those, you can see some of the things that did get into that public safety bill, plus others. And now let's see. I guess I need to say what sometimes we can do in the Senate is that we only had 34 votes, and the other side had 33. And so we have to get 100% agreement before we bring a bill to the floor. And in the case of 116 and 117, we did not have 100% agreement, but we were able to have the House pass bills that, they put things in their omnibus bill, and then it gets sent over to the Senate, and that had 116 and 117, 117 and 116 wording in it. So we were able to pass that as an omnibus bill. And looking over it in the last few hours here, it was an amazing bill. It is amazing. It has a lot of things in it, a lot of changes that, in fact, I don't even know all of them yet. I've been perusing through it. And that's something that when people look at it, they need to read over some of these things. It's like what we've seen or heard in the last 24 hours about Trump is read the bill, read the indictment, and it tells you what has been done. And these are the things that we've been waiting to do for years and years. I first got into this issue in the 90s, and on my own, I went up and testified in the House against the shall issue permit bill, and I was monitoring that closely and got involved in the original group in Minnesota called Citizens for Safer Minnesota. Now, I guess what we need to do is we need to talk more about what's happening today. So I'll let it be at that. But the important thing, what John said, I think the most effective thing to get more done is to get more letters to the editor, because a lot of voters read letters to the editor, whether they're on the left or the right. They read letters to the editor. Otherwise, if you just watch Fox or if you just watch MSNBC, you're just part of the choir. So what we have to do is we have to get things in front of people who may or may not know all the facts. Letters to the editor is, I would say, one of the best things you could do.
All right, Curtis and Dennis, I'll come to you in a second. But John, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts in response to what Senator Carlson said.
Letters, obviously, I feel are very, very effective. Also, it can be quite shocking to realize what people don't know. We had one of the really neat initiatives we have going now is the St. Paul group is trying to get funding for some signs, like three-way signs, that advocate people to employ safe storage if they own a weapon. And we worked with a graduate group at the University of Minnesota to develop the program. And every single one of those young people said, we had no idea of the severity of the problem of stolen guns ending up at a crime scene. And Anyway, yeah, so the education part is extremely effective. And I myself was actually rather shocked about the increase in gun violence that we're experiencing here in Minnesota. I had no idea. Over the last 3 years, we've had 138% increase in gun homicides in Minnesota. I don't know how many people are aware of that.
Is that that's homicides or all gun deaths?
Homicides, and I think it was like a 52% increase in suicides. You watch the nightly ritual of who shot whom on the news, and you have an inkling, but it's very hard to understand the extent of this problem here. It's quite severe. We rank number 44 in the nation for the percentage of gun deaths versus population size, so that's pretty good. But as I say, we've had a stark increase here in Minnesota in gun violence in the last few years, and it actually coincides with a stark increase in gun sales here too.
You raised so many questions, but I'll let our audience participate. Curtis, you are up next. You're mute.
Damn it. I was going to ask about newspapers specifically. I feel like that reaches older generations, perhaps more than younger generations. And I know that, for instance, young Republicans are more supportive of additional gun safety requirements and regulation than older Republicans. So it's already an issue that has better penetration with young people. But what's a good way to get in contact with young people that maybe don't read newspapers or traditional media?
Well, there's a group called Students Demand Action, who are just terrific. And they have organizing efforts in their schools. And that might be the best way right there.
Dennis, you have your hand up. You're not muted, but I can't hear you. Do you have your volume on your microphone turned up? All right. Not working, Dennis. Take a look at your settings and we'll come back to you in a little bit. John, you just said that Minnesota is number 44. And flip that around. We're the 6th best in terms of statistics, in terms of rates. And I did find somewhere it was written that the top 5 are Massachusetts, Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and then presumably us. What's going on in those states, including ours, that makes and I'm not sure if those are I think those are overall gun deaths, not just homicides or suicides. What is it that's going on in those 6 states that makes them more successful than the lowest 5, the ones with the worst rates, which include Mississippi, Louisiana, New Mexico, Alabama, and Wyoming? What's the difference?
I would say in a phrase, it's lax gun laws. If you look at any body that studies this, like Johns Hopkins, the RAND Corporation, or Everytown for Gun Safety, there's a complete correlation between the laxity of gun laws and the extent of gun violence.
Specific laws, though? What is it? What laws have those 6 states passed that make them not lax?
Those states have been actually, as other states have been tightening gun restrictions, they've been loosening them. No permit carry, open carry, where guns are allowed to be carried, that type of thing.
Stand your ground issues?
Stand your ground, yeah. Although I think, Ron, to be quite honest with you, I don't have a figure for the correlation between stand your ground laws and homicide rates. So I can't say definitively what that correlation is, but just intuitively you would think so. I don't know how much, quite frankly, that has corresponded to an increase in homicides.
Mm-hmm. Well, statistics are interesting and useful. You mentioned that the homicide rate, and I can't remember if you just said Minnesota or nationwide, has gone up substantially. But the suicide rate, although it's gone up, has not gone up at least by the same percentage. What was that Minnesota only? And perhaps what do you attribute that to? Stolen guns?
Let me get you the figures here. So in Minnesota, this is from 2018 to 21. We had 138% rise in gun deaths. Now that's suicide and homicide, and that compares to in the same time period 52% nationwide. And as I say, it also coincided with a 56% spike in gun sales here in Minnesota. 2021 was the highest number of gun deaths we've ever recorded. We average about 497 or so per year, and that in 2021, 573 people lost their lives. And I might mention that those rates are the worst for Indigenous people, and also for people of color and for veterans. 73% of the gun deaths in Minnesota are suicide. And there's an inverse relationship in greater Minnesota. The preponderance of gun deaths are from suicide. In the 7-county metro area, the preponderance of gun deaths are homicide.
All right, I didn't quite catch that. In the where do we find greater suicides, in the metro or the outstate areas?
In the outstate area by far. There's 73% of the gun deaths in Minnesota are suicide, and the bulk of that is in greater Minnesota, middle-aged white men. And the preponderance of gun deaths in the 7-county metro area are homicides.
Okay.
And that's skewed toward Indigenous, people of color, and veterans.
And so what do those statistics tell you in terms of policy that you should be advocating for?
The suicide rate is something that we address directly with the Extreme Risk Protection Order law that just passed. That gives family members and law enforcement the ability to petition a court to remove guns from the home of someone who might be a danger to himself or others. The way it works is you petition a court. If they find they have a 14-day period of investigating the issue, and if they decide that it makes sense to remove the gun, then it will be taken away for a minimum of 6 months or a maximum of 1 year. There's also a provision in there for a more immediate removal, where the gun is taken away within 24 hours, but then it starts a 14-day clock where they'll investigate further whether there should have been more of a hearing before that order was instituted. But that's the best defense we have for suicide.
Boy, I really thought about that law, the red flag law, in the context of homicides, and particularly in fraught relationships, which leads me to the question of whether the boyfriend loophole was closed in Minnesota.
The boyfriend loophole was actually closed in the federal legislation. Let's see here. Yeah, previously, if you were in a dating relationship with someone, that was excluded for a protection order. And in the Safer Communities Act that they passed in June of 22, that was amended to where it would include someone in a dating relationship.
Right, the Safer Communities Act, that's the federal one.
Right.
Okay, so we didn't need to do that for the red flag law in Minnesota?
In reading that act, I don't remember seeing, let me see something. I didn't see anything that addressed that in going through the verbiage of that act. Maybe Jim Carlson can help on that one.
Well, coincidentally, Jim has his hand up and I was about to go there. So Jim, maybe you can address that question. Is the boyfriend loophole closed in Minnesota? And then what was your question? And your chat and your mute is still on.
Yep. I'll have to look for that because I haven't seen exactly what is said there. There are a lot of small things that have been put into that. It's a several 100-page bill for public safety. But I had a question for John. If he has the rate of gun ownership by state. And if there's a correlation there of gun ownership and gun violence occurrences, one of the big things I think we're finding is that carrying a firearm often leads to using the firearm to settle an argument. We've had arguments all the time in bars and outside and between drivers, all of that sort of thing. And the fact that we have such a proliferation of people carrying that leads to a lot of shootings. And I think if you saw the paper about 2 days ago, they were covering the incidents of the shooting in the bar in downtown St. Paul, and how these young fellows were carrying guns and just started to shoot at each other because they had an argument. And that's one of the things that I think we have to address, is just the proliferation of firearms and the almost impossibility it is to limit people carrying firearms where they might get into some kind of an argument and then pull a firearm out as their power to settle an argument. But yeah, John, do you have any numbers on the rate of firearm ownership by state?
No, I don't. You know what, Jim? I will look that up while we're talking. I don't want to spout something. I don't have the exact figure on that. Anecdotally, I will say one thing. Well, of course, the Second Amendment entitles you to own a gun. In this background check law that we just passed, where you have to get a permit to purchase, once you have that permit, there's no restriction at all on the number of guns you can buy with it. You can buy as many guns as you want. But I'll look up that figure. However, anecdotally, I was just going to mention this. Recently, there was a young man arrested in St. Paul after a shooting, and they actually asked him why he did it. And he said, "I did it because I had to shoot first because everybody out here has a gun." So it gives you an idea. While we're talking, let me look up that figure though, and I'll come back to you on that.
Okay. Curtis, you have your hand up.
Yeah, 2 points. On the red flag law, it allows friends and family to file an order with the judge. So it would include boyfriends, presumably, or close the boyfriend loophole, or it would allow a girlfriend or a boyfriend to go to a judge and demand and seek the order. Okay. And on the second one, there's a pretty strong correlation between the amount of guns in circulation and the amount of gun deaths in any given state. It's not every state, but certainly there is a correlation there.
And where does Minnesota rank in terms of number of guns in circulation? I can't remember if somebody said that before or not.
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, Jim Carlson.
It hasn't been stated yet.
Has not been stated. Do you know the answer to that one, Jim?
I do not know that answer. No.
Okay, and I don't know if John is preoccupied in looking up some statistics on his own. If he can talk about that, I see. Dennis wrote his question in the chat. I was wondering about the language in the Second Amendment that says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. What are the parameters of infringed, of the word infringed? That's quite the legal question. And Dennis, I know from what I have read about various cases that have come down that so many laws infringe on the Second Amendment, and that there are not very many that regulations can be passed that don't infringe. So sadly, infringed is pretty broadly recognized at this point, but I don't have any particulars. Cheryl Casey, I see you have your hand up. Are you answering that question? Oh, okay. Well, in any event, Cheryl, go ahead. I was hoping, gall darn, that you might jump in and help me with that one. Cheryl, your mute is still on.
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
I think I'm just wondering your sense. I'm thinking that we're pretty lucky here in Minnesota because we haven't had any mass shootings, at least that I'm aware of. I think that there's some plans for one in St. Olaf, but is that folks' sense here? And I guess, what I'm really interested in is what is our legislative agenda, or what are you going to be looking at passing in the next sessions that you'd like us to, be focused on?
Okay, so for
How
John
are we going to
Harden,
strengthen our laws from here, from what we
Yeah.
did last year?
right, so John, there are a couple of questions in front of you now. Have you looked at the statistics? Have we had mass shootings in Minnesota? And what's the agenda going forward? You might take the rest of the time we have together to answer those questions, but go ahead.
Have we had mass shootings in Minnesota, and what was the rest of it?
First off, you were looking up some statistics.
Yeah, okay.
Have we had mass shootings in Minnesota? And what's the legislative agenda going forward?
Well, I think
Yeah, go ahead.
one
Jim.
of the things that I was thinking about is, my grandkids in school, they haven't had shooter drills, which we hear about all the time. We haven't scared
Really?
the Jesus out of our kids. And, I just think, are we in a better place in Minnesota than other locations?
What
localities?
school district are they in, Cheryl? Because I go to the Minneapolis school district where I volunteer, and I've participated in some of those drills.
Well, I'm in 196. Maybe
Okay.
they are having them and I'm just not aware. And that's, my daughter taught in the Minneapolis school district, and I think about it, they were under their desks when, they heard gunshots in the vicinity. So yeah, okay, maybe I'm just blind.
Okay,
I
well,
probably am.
the good news is you haven't heard about it. If it were important enough, you'd have heard about it. John, back to you.
Okay, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which keeps track of these things, we have had since 2013 to 2019, 22 mass shootings in Minnesota. And the definition of a mass shooting is where 4 or more people have been killed in one incident. That number puts us 33 when you rank the 50 states. So we're in the top 33.
Okay.
Um,
Let's see, what else was there? I know agenda going forward is another question.
I'm not going to speak specifically for moms on that score. The leadership would have to do that. I would only say this. You've heard of the Swiss cheese approach, where every piece of Swiss cheese has a hole in it, but the more layers you put on, the more those holes are closed to allow something to penetrate. And, so this bill was very significant to require permit to purchase. It closes the private sale loophole, which is extremely significant. We've also included other measures in there, like restrictions on no-knock warrants and more funding for mental health. But I would just say, as a private citizen, that I simply don't understand how in this country we think it's just fine to sell a weapon of war to a teenage boy.
Absolutely.
As I say, I don't speak for moms in what their legislation is going forward. At this point, our priority is to help in the implementation of the laws that we passed. And these things are always under threat. So, using that 3-pronged approach that we mentioned, that's our program going forward. And just to answer your question about the correlation between gun ownership and gun deaths, I just was looking at something by the CDC, and their conclusion was a robust correlation between gun ownership rates and gun homicide rates. So, as we might have expected.
Gun ownership and gun homicide. How about gun suicide? I would imagine the same thing would be true.
I guess so. It was, it wasn't in that article. I will say this: the presence of a gun in a suicide attempt is, you're virtually assured of losing your life. I think there's about a 97% chance that you're going to die if you attempt suicide with a gun, whereas by some other means, it's like a 27% chance. And also, the great number of people who have survived a suicide attempt don't ever try to do it again. So that's why it's so extremely important to remove a gun from a person who might be in danger of taking their own life.
John Wells, you have your hand up. Good morning, John. I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah, good morning, guys. And Ron. My question, I mean, I guess my comment is John, a few minutes ago mentioned that everyone has a right to own a gun. I think that's bullshit. The Second Amendment wasn't interpreted to allow that until about 10 or 15 years ago. For decades, it had always been tied into supporting the formation of a well-regulated militia, the other part of the Second Amendment. And you would only it had literally been interpreted. My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, and you can correct me, Ron, as the lawyer, but was that your right to own a gun was so that you could contribute to a well-regulated militia, to be part of one, to protect your community. So, which is an archaic such situation anyway, but that's the way it had been interpreted for decades and decades and decades until this is before Trump. So Trump's changing of the court more conservative isn't the reason for this interpretation, but it just makes me think we shouldn't give up on going back to that interpretation. We just need to figure out how to change the Supreme Court's composition to get us there, and not just assume, okay, everybody has a right to have that weapon because of the Second Amendment. That was a relatively recent interpretation, is at least my understanding. The other thing that I want to comment on is Heather Cox Richardson wrote a really interesting piece about the NRA 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, in which she noted that the NRA had its sole focus on gun safety until about 30 or 40 years ago, when Wayne LaPierre took control, and they shifted toward gun rights. It was basically a hunting group, not a fishing group, but you can shoot fish too, but that was a recent shift in the NRA, and I'm just wondering, is that a completely lost cause, or should we consider advertising targeted at the NRA as much as targeting at gun safety? Anyway, a couple points I wanted to make.
Okay. Well, John Wells, the Heller decision was the Supreme Court decision. It was 2008, and that's where they basically kicked the well-regulated militia language to the curb and ignored it. So it's been 15 years that the Supreme Court has gone that far. And then in response to was it Dennis's question earlier about the notion of in the right to the ability to infringe? I think infringement stuff comes from Heller. John Barton, did you have any comments to John Wells?
Yeah, you're right. That the Heller decision is when the Supreme Court first ruled that as a private citizen, you had a right to gun ownership. But significantly, also part of that decision was Scalia's language, where he said, in no way should this be understood to restrict reasonable or to prohibit reasonable restrictions on gun ownership.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's also very part of that decision.
But very few restrictions have been upheld since that time.
Well,
that's partly because in the latest Trump court, those kinds of radical rulings, they're not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Sparks, you have your hand up. Hi, Jeff, again.
Yes, given that in Federalist Paper number 29, which is the background for the Second Amendment, Hamilton writes about the well-regulated militia. Could a state require that if you own a military style weapon, that you join a militia and spend like 2 days every month training in the management of that weapon? I think that would discourage a lot of these wannabes from owning those weapons if that would stand up legally.
That's an idea I haven't heard very
It's
frequently.
kind of the National Guard we're talking about, right?
Yeah, you'd be a branch of the National Guard.
All right. So would that be a state legislative issue that our state legislature could require the National Guard to ensure that everybody who owns at least a military style weapon?
Well, the National Guard, each National Guard unit is under control of its state.
That's what I thought. Hey, Jim, there's your bill for next session.
Well, one of the first reactions would be is that, oh, that is punishing law-abiding citizens. That's always been the first defense that they use for any of these kinds of things. Even the background check law, if I could share my emails with you on 116 and 117, they used every possible excuse to say, don't pass any of those, all the way from, I think I should be able to use my firearm at any time to protect my home and my family. Okay, that's pretty soft. And right now we do have that right. And I think lawyers know that very well, that we have in law the requirement to retreat. And you can retreat, you should retreat until you get to your home. And then once you are in your home, you've always heard that, shoot them, drag them across the threshold, because if they're in your home, you've got a defense. But what's called the stand your ground law is where it expands the home to include what's called appurtenances. And that means your yard, it means your backyard and garage, and it also means your boat, your car, which that's one thing that people don't recognize, that the stand your ground law, and then also, depending on which state wording you use, stand your ground is, if I feel threatened, then I can use my firearm to protect myself and my family. Now, those kinds of things are really, they get expanded. And, you've heard that recent issue with, let's see, where was that? Texas, I believe it was, where the woman shot through the door and killed her neighbor. And she is using the stand your ground law, or let's say her lawyer is using the stand your ground law as her first defense. And what's frustrating is a lot of the neighbors said she should be arrested. She had a thing for this woman and her children. And in the stand your ground law is wording that requires the law enforcement to first give the person who fired the weapon a pass. They cannot take the weapon. They cannot arrest the person until they find probable cause that the person actually intended to do harm to the person that they shot and killed. So these are really bad laws, and the details of them are very threatening. And so we never want to have that in Minnesota. And that has been introduced every year in the 15 years I've been in the Senate. So it is something that if we didn't have a trifecta, if we had the opposite trifecta, those bills would be passed, and that would be law. And I don't know if everybody knows all that big list of about nine laws that they want to get passed, but it's, constitutional carry. That means that anybody who is a citizen has the right to interpret the Second Amendment as being able to carry a firearm anywhere they please and at any time, and buy as many as they want, and without a background check and without any training. So those are really those are serious bills. And I'm looking at right now. Let's see. I have my picture, and this is a list of the bills that have been referred to the Public Safety Committee. And if you look at that list, you'll see constitutional carry. They don't use stand your ground anymore because it's kind of gotten a bad reputation, but they're using changes in firearm. Let's see, what is it? Looking for the, exceptions to carrying permitted weapons, and then no permits and carrying in the Capitol, things like that. Oops, I didn't hit return here, but okay, there's a list that I see of things that we're actually considering yet. These are bills that are in consideration. They've been introduced. And so we have that list that we're probably going to look at more in the next year. And, each time you get some of these, really terrible acts like that woman in Texas, and she was eventually arrested because the sheriff said this had nothing to do with stand your ground. This was an intentional act where she shot through the door. She brought her firearm to the door to intentionally shoot her neighbor. And so they did finally arrest her. But these are things that, and I want to go back 2 steps. These are things that the NRA, it tends to push, and they tend to push some of these organizations that they fund heavily. The gun manufacturers, their marketing arm is the NRA. That's it's
Right.
as clear as can be that that's how they make their money. Every time there's a gun issue that happens, like even the Trayvon Martin shooting and all of those, gun sales just skyrocket because they've convinced the public that you need to have a firearm to be able to protect yourself. And, nothing is further from the truth, because like John said, that 70% of or more of the firearm deaths are by suicide. And
I have a gazillion questions that are still on my list, and we only have a couple of minutes left. Let me just list these questions just so you can think about issues. School hardening, interstate recognition of laws, ghost guns, ammunition regulation, magazine capacity. The one I do want to address in our final minutes, and then Curtis, you can ask your question before we get into it, is mental health, suicide, and mental health funding. But Curtis, why don't you ask your question? Curtis, where did you go?
He's in Mute City.
One
Oh,
of my
there you
questions
go.
about assault weapon bans and specifically high capacity magazines. So one of the things that when I'm talking to liberal gun owners, I have a few friends who are liberal gun owners who support gun safety regulation. And one of the things they complain about the most is that banning high capacity magazines will be completely ineffective because it takes, 2 seconds to swap out a replaceable magazine. And one of the things they say is instead we should ban all guns that have removable magazines and move to only guns that have fixed magazines where you have to load each round individually. I mean, you might be able, it's like a shotgun, you might be able to load, 8 rounds into the magazine, but you have to reload each round. So it takes longer to reload. And they think that would be better at preventing mass shootings. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. I believe Connecticut did pass a limit on magazine size.
John, you do a very good Roy Kent imitation.
Who's that?
Roy, oh, you don't watch Ted Lasso?
No, I don't
You got to
know.
watch Ted Lasso. All right. Last subject, because I see a lot of people are already starting to leave us. Mental health, suicide, and some of the funding for mental health, both federal and state. Give us your thoughts on those subjects in the few minutes we have left.
There is no question that mental health is part of this mix. There's no question about it. But I think it's used as a straw man.
It's not an exclusive problem, and there are lots of other solutions.
No, and mental health overall contributes about 4% to the crime rate in the country. As most people know, people suffering from a mental health issue are more likely to harm themselves than anybody else. So as I say, it's kind of a straw man. And I would just say, but it is important. I think that's a part of the mix. It definitely is. There's a guy that wrote a book last year called "I Could Have Been a School Shooter," and it's very interesting to listen to the trauma that this guy had suffered during his whole life, and that he was going to alleviate by just taking it out on somebody else. Also, one of our college professors at Hamline, Jillian Peterson, has done a lot of research on mass shootings. And there's no question that mental health has a part in the mix. But I would just say this, mental health, school security, all these different issues that come up when the other side talks about fixes, and they talk about anything but restrictions on gun ownership. All of these things have a veneer of logic, but they don't compare with simply keeping the gun out of the hand of a dangerous person to begin with. That is foundational. And that's why this background check law that we just passed is so important. That's the idea, is to keep the gun out of the dangerous person's hand to begin with.
Right. And Jim Carlson, you just noted in the chat that there's mental health funding in the public safety bill, and there's more funding for suicide call-in lines. Those are certainly good things. We have reached our hour. John, I want to give you the opportunity to provide some closing thoughts.
One of them, as I said initially, that for anybody interested in getting involved with this group, you will not have a second of your time wasted. These people would be comfortable in any corporate boardroom. They are so talented and so dedicated. And the other thing I'd like to say is I'd like to thank Jim Carlson and all the other legislators in our legislative body who worked on this and kept pushing and got it done. We couldn't have done it without you, so we really appreciate it.
No question that. Well, I'm looking forward to ongoing conversations, John. We bounced around a lot, covered a lot of ground. There's so much more that we can talk about, but more importantly, there's a lot more that we can do. I will usurp Lisa Noah, our chair's prerogative, for a second and remind you all that we've got our communication at 7 o'clock. That's on Zoom. And our next Central Committee meeting is next Thursday, June 15th, 7 o'clock by Zoom. And our illustrious Vice Chair, Curtis, who is hosting us this morning on Zoom. Any thoughts for the SD52 group that you want to share?
No, I think you nailed all the recent stuff, or all the upcoming stuff.
Okay. Well, John Barton, thank you so much for coming on this morning, being the representative of the South Metro area. I look forward to lots more conversations going on, lots more work together in electing good officials. I had hoped that we would talk about who are those senators in the group of 34 that we've got to make sure that we keep on board, and of the 33 on the wrong side that we can replace by Democratic senators. But in the meantime, that's all we got for today. So thank you all for coming on. Enjoy a beautiful day. And I think maybe we're going to get some rain finally. So until next time, we will see you all.
Ron, you want to keep the channel open for just a moment?
Thank you.
Sure.